Okay, welcome everybody. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law, chapter 23. We are up to number 20, Sif Chof. Someone else in? All right. So we finished off last time. We said that we have a minimum of 10 psukim, 10 verses whenever we read the Torah. Obviously on Shabbos, there's a lot more than that. But there's always a minimum. The exception was on Purim. Purim is only 9. Other than that, there's always at least 10. And each call-up is at least 3. At least 3 verses. So number 20. HaKoyra b'Torah, the person who gets called up to the Torah. Lo yisayim b'mokim shelo yisha, sorry, the one reading the Torah. Lo yisayim b'mokim shelo yisha misham ad parsha dan b'chusa b'summa shloish b'sukim l'chol hapachos. Anywhere where he stops reading for a call-up, there's to at least be 3 verses until the next Pesucha or Stuma. So I'll explain what they are in a minute. So we're going to loosely call it to the end of the paragraph, and we'll come back to it. So the end of the paragraph, because whenever there's a new paragraph, it starts a new topic. So you want to make sure there's at least 3 verses, so the next call-up can be within that topic. So if you look in a Torah scroll, or sometimes the Chumash are printed that way, you'll see that there's breaks. There's breaks, and there's 2 types of breaks. One is Pesucha, which literally means open. That means you'll have a word or 2 or something on a line, and the rest of the line is empty. That's why it's called Pesucha. It's called open, because it's the row, there's some words on one side, but the other side of the row is open. And a stuma is where you have some words, word or 2, let's say, a gap, and then another word or 2 at the end of the line. So welcome those just joined us, chapter 23. We've just started number 20. So there breaks in essentially a new paragraph. It's a new topic. So Rashi explains it for us actually in 2 parshas ago, in Parsha Vayikra, what happened over there. So we know when Hashem gave the Torah to the Jewish people, gave it to Moshe, what happened is Hashem gave Moshe a shir. So first he dictated letter by letter exactly what Moshe should write. And literally letter by letter, because some letters are sometimes written larger, some are written smaller. Usually they're all the same size, but there are larger letters and small letters. And also there are words that can be written with a vav, without a vav, or other letters. So for an example, sort of the equivalent in English of do not or don't. Sort of that idea. It's not exactly the same thing, but a similar idea. You can write words in full, like do not, or you can write a shorter version, like don't. And so Hashem dictated to Moshe exactly how to write it, whether some full or short and various things. After Hashem dictated, Hashem gave Moshe a shir. What exactly do these verses mean? At all different levels, going from the simple reading to things that are inferred, things that are hinted at, to the Kabbalistic teachings that are embedded in these verses, etc., etc. So all that was taught to Moshe. Now, at that point, Moshe was given a break to go review. Yes, he also taught after he reviewed, he taught the Jewish people, and there was a whole process. First, he would teach Aaron, and then Aaron would stand to the side, and he would teach Aaron's son. So Aaron hears it from Moshe again. Then he teaches to the elders and taught to the people, and then Aaron repeated the shir to everyone. So everyone heard it several times, and everyone heard it from Moshe at least once. But the break was time for Moshe to review. And Rashi points out, when the student is the great Moses, and the teacher is God Almighty himself. And you still need to review. You need to take time out every now and then and review what you learn to remember it and understand it properly. How much more so if the teacher's a regular person and the student's a regular person, that you need to take time out and review. So that's so that, you know, when one of the teachers that the Rabbanim that I learned with, actually already had smicha, already had rabbinic ordination, but we learned it to a higher level. He reviewed everything over 60 times before he taught it. It was, you know, he had true mastery. But anyway, so that's what these gaps, these breaks in the Torah are. That's when Moshe reviewed. So normally starts a new topic afterwards, and so we should have at least 3 verses to read. And because we don't want the reader to have to go back a verse. Rather, he takes over from the place where the previous reader read. And then he can have an additional 3 verses. You can read 3 verses in the second section. Now, if you have a pasha, it only is 2 psukim, 2 verses. You're allowed to stop there. Im yesh piska be'emsa pasuk. And if there's some type of break within the pasuk, and we're going to give an example, Gagoin, for example, Tchilas Pashas Pinchas, in the beginning of the pasha of Pinchas.
Можете подержать. Это мне очень трудно и держать и писать.
So, we have Mutter l'sayim efilo pasuk samachlo. You can even stop in the verse next to it. Okay. So, just to clarify again, and to go slightly off topic, just so everyone understands, when we say today in the Torah that there's, you know, something is, say, chapter 10, verse 20. Okay, so those chapters and verses are not Jewish. They're from the church, right? So what happened is the Jewish traditional breakup, so is by the Pasha, and within the Pasha, as we said, we have these paragraphs, for lack of a better term, that you've got these gaps in the Torah that show that this is the end of the topic or an idea. And that's really the breakups. And you actually see a lot of the non-Jewish ones. And the breakups, you can have, you know, like a new Pasha in the Torah, a new weekly Torah reading starts verse 2 or something. So obviously, you know, they messed up where they did the break and different things. So in case you're wondering now that if it comes from the church, why do we use them? So there was two main reasons. Reason number one was that the first printing presses were owned by the church. And therefore, when they published the first Hebrew Bibles and various things, they just put in their numbering system. So that's number one. And number two is that unfortunately there were many debates. Right, the church organized many debates, and the Jews didn't have a choice whether to participate or not. They were forced to. And they will start quoting verses, you know, in chapter 12, verse 40, and they've so mistranslated the verse, as unfortunately many of their translations are. Some deliberate and some out of ignorance, but there's many poor and mistranslations. So some mistranslated that the person who was representing the Jewish people couldn't recognize the verse. And he's saying chapter 42 verse, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So it couldn't even look it up. So it ended up that the Jews had to become familiar with the system as a matter of self-defense, in these forced debates. So once, for these two reasons, it became commonly used or commonly known, then I guess out of ease, it's quicker to be able to do everything by number rather than the traditional Torah breakup. But of course, it does lead to a few misunderstandings. So, for an example, there's in the non-Jewish version, well, not only they broke it up in the to the chapters, sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, but they divided certain books into two. So, for example, there's 2 books of Kings, 2 books of Shmuel. There was really only 1 book, right? If you look in Tanakh, there's 1 book of Malachim, 1 book of Kings. But I guess it's a long book, and they had a short attention span, I guess, in the early church people. So they had to divide it into 2 to make 2 books out of it. So they tell the joke. There was a Israeli tourist guide, and he takes a person to the graves, and he says, and this is the prophet. This is the burial place of the prophet Samuel, Shmuel. And then later on their trip on the tour, he shows them, and this is the burial place of the prophet Shmuel. And they said, how can there be 2? What do you mean? So it says Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Beis, Of course, there's really only 1 Shmuel, but that's what happened. And just as a side point, it's not what we're learning, so it's already a side point on a side point, but I just think once we mention it's important to mention one of the so-called claims that these so-called Bible experts have, that there was different authors and different things, as they point out, in these longer books of the Torah, of the Tanakh, that the style of writing changes. I had an article that I put in a Jewish publication some time ago, and then about 10 years later, I was asked to submit something to a publication. I thought I'll submit the same thing that I put before. It was an interesting topic, and what happened is I almost totally rewrote it. It was the same point, but in 10 years, I guess my writing style, or how I felt best to express it, had changed. That I pretty much rewrote the entire thing. That was 10 years. Some of these prophets had a career of being a prophet, 70 something years. The fact that someone's writing style changes as they get older is hardly a surprise, and it doesn't mean they had to be a different person. And then, of course, if you speak about someone like Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah, that he lived through the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Millions of people being killed, is like someone living through the Holocaust. Obviously, he was affected, and you could surely imagine that his writing style changed before and after. Right? They try to say, oh, there was 3 or 4 Jeremiahs. No, just the fact is, life experiences change people in the way they express themselves. It doesn't mean it was a different person. And anyway, so that's unfortunately what happened, is that we end up with these different numbering systems, and people mistakenly think that it's actually a Jewish numbering system, when in fact it's not. Okay. Number 21. So likewise, you shouldn't begin reading if there's less than 3 verses after the beginning of the parsha. Right? So sometimes these little, when we say parsha here, we don't mean the weekly parsha. We mean like these paragraphs. So what happens when a person reads that if it's a long reading, like on Shabbos, you might go through several of these paragraphs. So the stop where we pause for between one call up and the other call up, you have to have read at least 3 in the new paragraph, because otherwise, someone who walks into shul late and they see the call up start at this point, they will think that the previous reader perhaps only read 2 verses. So you see, it's an interesting thing where we even do things to be concerned about those who walk into shul late might misunderstand something. Therefore, so the person shouldn't stop less than 3 verses into the paragraph. Okay, that's more of a technical thing. I mean, generally speaking, we have set places where to finish, and we follow set places, but there are times where we will add call-ups. The Chabad custom is generally not to add call-ups. But there are places, particularly if there's a wedding or a bar mitzvah, and there's lots of family, or you have sometimes several weddings, several grooms being called up, and sometimes they add call-ups. They divide the call-ups into more than one, which technically is allowed. But you have to be careful where you do the stop. You can't just stop anyway. Right? We have to make sure that it's at least 3 verses. It shouldn't be less than 3 verses. To the end of a paragraph has to be at least 3 verses out from the beginning of the paragraph. So these are the things that's what we're talking about. It's not like you can stop wherever you like. There are step places, but if you're making more call-ups, that's where these rules come into play. Okay, number 22. We try, whenever possible, that the call-up should begin with something positive for the Jews and should end with something positive. Unfortunately, there are episodes recorded in the Torah. This doesn't, where we made mistakes and we did the wrong thing, or something bad has happened, and we don't want to start with that, and we don't want to end with that. Let it be in the middle somewhere. So we try to start with the beginning and end with the beginning. And also, we shouldn't end at a point where someone did something inappropriate. Right? Someone did the wrong thing. Don't stop there. That shouldn't be between call-ups. What everyone's thinking about is this guy's mistake in life. Okay, 23. It's I give a Talmud class in the mornings. Some people here, and there was recently there was a fellow who's mentioned by name that he essentially tried to cheat someone, and he was going to swear falsely. Whatever that going into details of the story, but it's interesting. This fellow who lived maybe 2,000 years ago almost, he's forever known perpetually for being the thief. Right? That's hopefully, I did see in a sefer that someone said, heard actually, that someone said that's actually for his benefit. The fact that people are studying the Torah and they mention his name and they mention his situation, that merit goes to him, that it should repair him for the damage he did in his life to himself spiritually. But this person is always remembered for what he did. So we don't want to stop at a point where a person has done the wrong thing and have them always remembered. We try and end on a positive note. Okay, so 23. So what happens? We said we shouldn't have only 2 verses to the end, but you didn't realize. In the Torah, there's not punctuation, including where the verses end. The person misjudged. He stopped in the wrong place. And the person being called up said the blessing already. If he didn't say the blessing, you just read another few verses, no problems. But we didn't realize till after the blessing was made. So now we have someone the next call up, and there's less than 3 verses to the end of a pasha, to the end of a paragraph, and we can't do that. So what does he do? So what we do is we repeat it. We repeat that call up. So we have the blessings one afterwards. And the reason we make new blessings is because since someone made the blessing, the after blessing already, we took our mind off doing this mitzvah. If they hadn't made the blessing, as I said, we can just fix it up. Once you made the blessing afterwards, everyone's taken their mind off this reading. So if we read it again, has the blessings again. Al-Kain sarch lahaschel gam baruch. And not only that, we even have the introductory baruch, which is not part of the bracha, it's an introduction. V'yikra shnei psukim shekar techilon. And then we read what we read till now, and we include these 2 verses. Sorry, we read these 2 verses, oid posuk echad imoy, together with a third blessing, a third verse. Vim karazois b'shlishi. Now, if this one who's reading is the third call up, so then serichim likrois oid shnei psukim, we read 3 additional. Because what's going to happen now if we add another verse to this call up, the next call up might be short. So then we add more. Shiur kulam abraham psukim, that we should make that all of them, so it ends up that all of them are 4 verses. Okay, and we'll go through it quickly. I mean, it's not really relevant for the majority of people, because even the people who are attending synagogue every day aren't the ones deciding where to make the breaks and various things. And if there was a break in the wrong spot, then normally they ask the rabbi of various things. So we'll go through it quickly just so we can eventually people be able to say that they studied this entire Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law, cover to cover. God willing. Yes, Ben.
I remember we studied it in a Talmud class too.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it was in
Brachos,
Brachos,
yeah.
but I'm not sure what book it was. But I know that we
Yeah.
studied it in Brachos, in the Talmud class.
Yep, very good. Okay. So, Vim Karazois B'Koin. Now, if this error was in the Kohen's call-up, so the first call-up, Shloi Kararak Shnei Psukim, you only read 2 verses instead of the 3 minimum. Kara Achrav Levi, and you've already called up the Levi. V'nizkar Achkach, and then you only realized afterwards. So, Aziyadin Kainhu, in Malevadain Lo Barach Bracha Rishona. So if the Levi has not yet said the blessing, even though he's called up, but he didn't yet say the blessing, even if he said Baruch Hu, but didn't start the actual blessing of the Torah, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, lo his chalas bracha, so he hadn't started. But brachas kamishik savti. So the kohen has his call up all over again because it was not enough. So just to try and put into the same idea in another context, this would be similar to, let's say, for an example, someone was lighting the menorah. Now, the menorah the candle has to have enough oil or wax, whatever it is, to last half an hour after dark. So let's say it didn't. It only had enough for 10 minutes. The person didn't realize. They said the blessings. They lit the candle. And it goes for 10 minutes and then it's gone. Not because it got blown out or something else happened. He realized that it never had enough fuel to start with. So that person didn't actually do the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah has a shear, it has a measurement. Every mitzvah has a measurement. So because it was lacking the fuel, the mitzvah was not done. So now when the person resets up the menorah and they have a longer candle or more oil, whatever they're using, and it's enough to last half an hour, they have to say the blessing again, because when they made the blessing the first time, it wasn't on the mitzvah, because the mitzvah wasn't performed. So now they're going to do the mitzvah properly, they have to make the blessing all over again. So that's what's happened here. The minimum reading has to be 3 verses. And he's made the blessing. They only read 2 verses. And he made the after blessing. And then they've realized. So this kohen, we give an example as a kohen, he is going to have to read it, get called, say the blessings again, because although we said the blessings in good faith, but the mitzvah wasn't fulfilled. It was too small. It didn't reach the shear. Wasn't the right amount. And so now that we're going to do it again to fix it, yes, say the blessings again. And unfortunately, his first blessings were in vain. They were invalid because what was performed wasn't the appropriate amount. Okay, so that's what he does. And this Levi was already called up. He just waits to the side until we fix up the Kohen's call up, and then he gets his call up afterwards. So that's if we catch it before the Levi starts the blessing. Avol im kava baruch Levi. He already said Hashem's name in the blessing, the Levi. So we called up the Kohen. He said the blessing. They unfortunately only read 2 verses. He said the after blessing. They call up the Levi. The Levi has said his blessing. And then we realize, oi, the last call up was short. Azayikrush im halevi mokim shepasuk kohen. So then what do? Then the Levi's reading begins from the place the Kohen's ended. Im yikro la Levi mashkar Kohen. Because if we're going to start now the Levi doing the 2 verses of the Kohen, it's going to look like there was a problem with the Kohen. If you recall what we said before, earlier, we don't call 2 Kohens in a row. Once we call one Kohen, we don't call another one. And once we call one Levi, we don't call another one. Because if we do, it looks like we're saying there was a problem with the pedigree, with the yichus of the first Kohen or the first Levi. So even though this call-up that the Kohen had was deficient, wasn't enough verses, but if we're going to start back, if this Levi that gets called up is going to start back and do those 2 verses again, it's going to look like there was a problem with the Kohen. And that's why we're doing his reading again. So we just start where he left off, even though the first call-up was deficient. People say, Levi the Levi is starting at the beginning of the Torah. And so it's not only this Kohen who got the call-up, but any other Kohen in the room. Why are we starting at the beginning of the Torah reading with the Levi? Must be none of these Kohanim are any good. And we don't want that mistake to happen. So, and after this Levi, we call up 2 Yisraelim. Right? So we're talking about a Monday or a Thursday. You're not talking about Shabbos Yom Tov, we have multiple call-ups anyway. Talking about where we only have 3 call-ups. So now we're going to end up with a 4th call-up. Because instead of calling 1 Yisrael, we're going to call 2. And that way we'll have 3 call-ups of at least 3 verses. And 10 all up. We'll have a full Torah reading. Because then we're going to end up with actually having 3 proper readings. The Kohen Einim in a minion, because we can't count the Kohen's call-up as part of it. Because only 2 verses were read. So it was deficient. So his call-up didn't really count. And so therefore we have a Levi and then 2 Yisraelim. And if you called the Levi and only 2 verses were read, not necessarily as well as the Kohen only being 2, but I'm saying the same mistake was by Levi. The Yisrael cover Beirach, and so again, we would do the same process. The Levi would have his call up again, would do 3, but the Yisrael after him already said the blessing. So now what do we do? Yisrael Eilishne Pesukim Shkara Levi Pasuk Echad. Now we can go back. The Yisrael can go back and do the 2 verses of the Levi, because the concern was only when we start the Torah reading. It was going to be very noticeable. Here is not as noticeable. And so he reads it, and then we have Yikro Oid Yisrael Echad Hashum Shloi Korim, and we call another Yisrael to fix up, so we end up with 3 proper ones and don't count the deficient one. Ve'im loy hayakoim v'eskeneses akol Yisrael mikoimoi. So all of that we had to do because we're worried about casting aspersions on the pedigree of the Kohanim. But let's say there was no Kohanim in the shul, and anyway called up a Yisrael in his place, and this situation happened. And he only read 2 verses. And we only realized after the next Yisrael got called up and made the blessing. He can go back to the beginning of the Torah reading. And the first one, where it's after Yisrael, and then you call it an because if we go back, if we're anyway having Yisrael reading from the beginning, we can have another Yisrael. And then that person who had the deficient one was called first, he gets another call up second. And then we call a third person for the third. And that way we get to have 3 proper size call ups. Okay, I hope I didn't make that more complicated. Is it? So in a nutshell, if it's deficient in the amount of verses, it doesn't count, and we have to fix it. All right, 24. Cotton lo yeh kaira v'gam eina ola l'Torah. A cotton meaning someone under bar mitzvah, they cannot get a call up, and they can't be the reader on behalf of the people getting called up. And the person has to be bar mitzvah. Chaf Hey 25. So as we said a few times already, whenever there's an end of a section, we have a kaddish. And we said there's different types of kaddish. There's this chatzi kaddish, which means half kaddish, even though it's closer to 2/3 kaddish, but who's counting? And we have a mourner's kaddish and a kaddish d'Rabbanan, and what we call a full kaddish shalom. So there's different kaddishim, but always a kaddish comes at the end of a section. And so now that we finished the Torah reading, we have a half kaddish. It's the end of a section. Magbiyim a sefer Torah, and then we pick up the Torah. Torah is picked up. So again, as we said, there's no such thing as a Sephardi Torah or Ashkenazi Torah. It's the same Torah. It's just what we normally refer to are different casings. So if one has what they call a Sephardi Torah, most of them actually, I think they do the Haggadah before the Torah reading, not after. But they pick up the case and hold on to the case and show it. When we call the Ashkenazi Torah, of course, as we said, it's the same Torah. There's no different Torah, but it has the wooden, it's attached to the wooden rollers on the outside. So then one holds onto the handles called the Eitz Chaim, literally the trees of life, and they hold it up like that. So they pick it up, and like be a Pesach Sefer Torah, and you have it open. Shia Shloisha Amudim Minek Sav Goloi. The idea is to have 3 columns visible. So you pick it up, 3 columns visible. You know, it's difficult to be exact. People normally have a drop more on either side. You know, that some people feel the need to stretch their arms out as wide as they can and have 17 columns or something open. You know, I'm not a fan of that. I can just see that the more you do things like that, God forbid, the easier it is to have a mishap, and it's unnecessary. Right? The idea is to have 3 columns open. You know, I always try not to have multiple columns open, but you know, each their own. So why do we have the 3 open? Ki mitzvah al kol noshim liroisi kasav. There's a mitzvah that all the people present should be able to see the writing. And they say, this is the Torah that was given to Moshe, right? This is, they said, this is the Torah. So you need to see the writing. Some people try to be close enough that they can actually make out the words, not just see the writing. Okay, that's nice in the small shul. Again, in a big shul, you don't want this mad rush of everyone, you know, knocking the tables out of the way to get close enough to see the writing. It's not necessary. If you're able to, it's nice. But if it's not practical, it's not practical. If you can't be close enough to actually make out the words, the main thing is just to see the writing. So you see the writing. And that way you can say, you know, this is the Torah, because you see the writing. And normally the person who picks up the Torah, they turn it round from side to side. So everyone on whatever side of the shul you're on is able to see it. The goylin is the sefer, and then we roll up the sefer. A mitzvah l'glalashia tefa b'emsa shnei haglilus. And the idea is when you roll it up, you should have the seam. You know, the Torah is made of pieces of parchment, and they're sewn together. So you want to have the seam in the middle. The reason for this is that if it tears, God forbid, at least it tears at the seam. Right? And it's easy to fix, not where the writing is. You know, I had a student, school-age student, ask, you know, why do they sew the pieces together? Why don't they just get a piece long enough? So I told him, you know, like when you roll out a Sefer Torah, it's about 50 meters long. You know, I don't know how many yards is that. I don't know. It's a little bit more. So I told him, if you see an animal that's big enough that you could get one strip of skin that's 50 meters, he says, yeah. I said, run. You don't try to shaft it and make a not there is such an animal, but you know, theoretically, if you saw one, you run. That's so we put the seam in the middle. Vigal ad shiat tefa samuch be'emsrat. So it's in the middle. Im tefa shelafonav yoyse samuch. So if the one beforehand is closer, you go l'sham, you go there, even though you're going to go backwards a little bit. That's not a problem. If the one afterwards is closer, so you finished in the middle of a piece, and the next seam is after, you know, you're going to be skipping a little bit, putting it there. Still, you go you roll there, Sefer Torah, because we want to minimize the amount of rolling to get to the seam. Out of respect for the Sefer Torah, it's not the time to sit there rolling it. Whichever one's closer, we put it, and there's no problem. Okay, and then of course, although he doesn't say it here, after it's rolled up, we dress it. Chafvav 26. B'chol eish shekorim b'Torah. Anytime we read the Torah, we always have a half kaddish, levad, except mincha b'Shabbos. Mincha on Shabbos, or mincha b'Tainus, and mincha on a fast day. So they're pretty much, so there's no kaddish. There we instead combine together with the kaddish we're going to say before the Shemona Esrei, and the kaddish serves both purposes. Okay, Chav Zayin 27. B'Sheni of a Chamishi, on Mondays and Thursdays. So in the morning, Mondays and Thursdays, we read the Torah. And as we said at the beginning of the chapter a few weeks ago, Ezra Sefer, Ezra, the leader of the Jews who rebuilt the Second Temple, he instituted this. So we should never have 3 days without hearing the Torah. So we read on Shabbos, and then we have Monday, a Thursday and the Shabbos again. So it's never 3 full days go without having the Torah read. So when we read on Monday and Thursday, so the Chazan, after he does Hagba, he says these lists of Ihirotzoins. Now it's not the excuse me, it's not the Chabad custom to say that, but it's in most Ashkenazim say. I'm really not sure if Sephardim say it or not. But there's different things that we pray for. The last one has become very famous through a song, and particularly the song has become more popular after the tragedies of October 7, the war, and that's the Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, that all our brothers, the entire Jewish people, wherever they're in trouble, and that special prayer that's become quite famous, but that's where it is in that part of davening. So those who say it, say it. So those who do say it, the way it works is normally the Chazan, but sometimes the Gabbai, he says a Hirotzain, it's a little paragraph, should be Hashem's will, and each one's a blessing for the Jewish people. Tzrichim and Sibla Shmoya, and the congregation listen to him say it, so it's only the one person saying it. Amen, and then they say Amen. And doesn't say it. Here, the last one, that famous one, the Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, that all our Jewish brothers and sisters, they should all be saved, that everyone says together at the end. And if there's a day we don't say Tachnun, the prayers where we're asking for forgiveness, we don't say this either. This is a little bit different. Most of the other parts of davening that we don't say in a day of Tachnun, even though they're not Tachnun, they've got the same feel. So, for example, the beginning of the davening, we say the part from the Torah about how Avram offered his son on the altar, right? The Kedas Yitzchok, the binding of Isaac, and afterwards there's a Rabboni Shalom, is a prayer where we ask Hashem to just as Avram smothered his feelings that he had for his own child to do what Hashem wants. So you should also, take away anything that we have done wrong. And so even though it's not Tachnun, it's a similar theme. So these Hirotzains, interestingly, they're not the theme of Tachnun at all, but they're not said. Okay. Chav Ches, number 28. So afterwards, we put the Torah back. We do this immediately afterwards. That's what he's writing, because he lives in a place where pretty much everyone daven Nusach Ashkenaz. Those who daven Nusach Ari, Nusach Sfard, or a Sephardic, they put it back. There's another section of davening first, but it gets put back. A mitzvah kol adam shesefer Torah over lefanov, and any person who the Torah passes by them, they have a it's a the mitzvah to go along with it. Also, the person who lifted it and rolled it up, they should accompany it to the Aron HaKodesh. Now, again, as we said this before. We took out the Sefer Torah. Everyone who goes by, they should accompany the Sefer Torah. This is only where it's practical. Right? In many shuls, if you're going to have half the shul now following the Sefer Torah after the Ark, you can end up with this big traffic jam, and it's not going to work. So, but if you're able to, it's a beautiful thing, and if you can't, you can't. Yes, Ben.
By us, they walk around the shul with the Sefer Torah before the reading.
Right. Well,
and then they put it down in front of the Aron and they read it, and then they do the Agba and sit down with it.
Yeah, but then when they go back, they're going to go the other side, back to the Ark.
Yes, but no.
Yeah.
They are sitting down in front of the Ark too. And I guess there is prayers that have to be said before they can return the Sefer Torah on Shabbat.
Yeah, so I'm presuming
Like the blessing for the Israelis and the soldiers.
okay,
and
yeah,
the
so
soldiers.
that's on Shabbos. Oh, you
Yeah,
do that
on
every day?
Shabbos.
Yeah.
No,
So this is a
not
weekday.
on
It's not about the
Monday, not
weekdays.
on Monday and Thursday, just on Shabbos.
Yeah, yeah. This is Mondays and Thursdays.
Okay.
Okay. Number 29. But Markim Shein Sefer Torah. If there's no Sefer Torah, Kol Echad B'Tei Chumash V'Kol Ram, V'Siv Yishmo Shel Yishach Torah's Kriya. One person should read from a Chumash in a loud voice. Everyone should listen, not because he did the mitzvah, but in order that the concept should not be forgotten. It shouldn't disappear. People shouldn't, normally a place doesn't have a Sefer Torah, doesn't have for extended period of time. It shouldn't be that they forget there's such a thing as public Torah reading. So at least we do it from a Chumash. Okay. Lamed, number 30. You got a minyan, 10 people, and there's no Sefer Torah to read. You can't just bring a Sefer Torah from a totally different location just for them to read and then take it back. Even if they're incarcerated in prison, we don't bring a Torah. Now, we're not talking about a Torah that goes there permanently. We're talking about now just coming for their minyan and going back. Even Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim, even Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we're not going to bring them a Sefer Torah. What do we have to do? So what's the way to be able to do it? If they prepared a day or two in advance some type of ark to hold the Sefer Torah respectfully, the Sefer Torah, that they can make a set place for the Sefer Torah, mutter, then it's allowed. So, in other words, we've spoken several times about having of a certain respect and for the Torah scroll. So it's not just something that we just schlap here and we schlap there. We'll take it to these 10 guys so they can read it, and then someone else will slap it off to someone else. Another 10 guys. You come to it, doesn't come to you. However, there always are new shuls, or there's people go away for the summer, or whatever happens to be. So you set it up properly and make a set place for it. It's not just that it comes and goes and comes and goes. But let's say you have a very important person. By very important, we mean entire mitzvahs. And he's unwell. Then you can bring it to his location just for the reading. There is an opinion. If you have a very important person, even if he's not well, you could bring it. And for an unwell person, even if they're not important, mutter, it's allowed. Now, normally we don't follow this, but he says, but we could be lenient for the special pashas that are potentially Torah obligations, and for someone who's not well, or an important person who is, even if they are well, that we can bring it. Okay.
I think I saw that they brought a Torah for Shiva too.
For a yeshiva?
No, for Shiva, when
for Shiva,
somebody passed
but
away.
over there, so generally the rule is like this. What we don't try not to bring it just like one-off readings, because it means just slapping through my convenience. But when you have a legitimate need, let's say like someone is sitting Shiva, and therefore they're having services in the house, or in a place where it's going to be used 3 times. It's going to have a set place, and it's going to be used at least 3 times. That's generally when we
they made sure that they had a minyan all the time, and they had the Sefer Torah.
Yeah, so the Shiva is not necessarily going to be used 3 times. Could even be only once, depending on what day the funeral is and various things. But it's going to be at least twice. But over there, it's
No, it was the
just
whole
in case
week.
some people aren't familiar, so certain the close relatives, one sits shiva for the week, and hopefully no one knows. Shouldn't have to know these things too well, but
Right.
the davening should ideally be in the house of the deceased, and if not,
Right.
in the house of the mourner. And by having in the house of the deceased, even if it's not the house of the mourner, it helps. It's very beneficial to them, very beneficial to their soul.
No, it was in the house of the deceased. Yeah.
Sometimes in the deceased, and sometimes it's in the house of the mourner, because somebody's going to live in different countries and different things, and the mourner shouldn't really leave the house during the week of mourning. Obviously, if someone has a medical condition or something, they're allowed to, or if they can't get a minion in the house, they can go to pray. But if things can be worked out, it's best they stay home for that week. Okay, so an introduction to chapter 24. Yeah, David.
Yeah, the footnote in my Shulchan Aruch, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in English, it says the Mishnah Berurah allows a Torah scroll to be brought to 10 people who are imprisoned, or 10 sick people confined to the same place.
Okay, that's good. Which edition do you have?
It's the Talger edition.
Okay, so that's thank you for sharing. And unfortunately, there are certain prisons where they have a full-time synagogue. It's unfortunate that sometimes Jews get themselves into the situation, but nobody is perfect.
So if somebody sees a Sefer Torah in a prison, they shouldn't think somebody did something wrong.
Yeah, that's
Besides
what some of us have that, right? They even have little yeshivas, and that's the right way to put it, in some of the prisons. It's sometimes it's people who have made various mistakes, and sometimes it's people who made big mistakes, but in prison with time to think, they change themselves. I've had the privilege to be able to assist several people over the years in learning more and growing their observance, who lived very poor lives until they went to prison. And for the first time in their life, they actually had time to think, and they realized how the way they're living their life is destroying themselves, and they started to change. And then when they came out, they were able to change. Some people say that, then they don't change when they come out. But I've had the privilege to work with people that really did change. And Baruch Hashem, they really grew. So an introduction to the chapter. So Hebrew letters. So we have, like script, sort of handwriting. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the way that the Hebrew letters are written in a Torah scroll, or tefillin, or mezuzahs, or Megillah. All these is a certain prescribed way to write each of the letters. Now, each of the letters, it's not just somehow we decided this is how we're going to make this letter. Again, you have all these people who try to come up with these theories, and again, it's generally people with agendas. They try to say, there was like this ancient Hebrew, and it was an aleph was like an ox, and they drew a picture of an ox, and someone got like this. It's based on terrible misunderstandings. What we have to understand is that just as today we have the way the Torah is written, and then if you look at the way we write Hebrew, if we're writing a letter or we're writing something, we're just in handwriting, we don't write it anywhere near like the way it's written in Sefer Torah, because it would be too slow to get it exact and precise. We have like a little, like a cursive, like a running writing, just a quick way to write.
Shorthand.
Shorthand, well, it's not shorthand because we have every letter, but it's not the It's not the exact way to write in the Sefer Torah. You know, it takes 1/10 of the time per letter, maybe less. And it's like so the same way we have that today, they had that in ancient world also. It was different to how we have it today. And therefore you see when they find these old scrolls or tablets and they see this ancient writing, it's not because we suddenly one day woke up and wrote a Torah the way we write it now. It's because they had a handwriting. Just as we have a handwriting that's different today, it's quicker, much more convenient. That's what they had in those days too. Just the Torah scrolls didn't survive, you know. Yeah. Yes, Ben.
Interesting, we had a Torah that had a misspelled word for years. And then an Israeli guy that got the Aliyah all of a sudden saw that one word is misspelled. And they checked it and it was misspelled. They had to change the Torah, but it took years for them to really get somebody to find it and see it.
Well, it happens, you know.
The readers never found it.
Well,
It was
because,
either
you know,
a
it's
samach
like,
instead of a sin, or a sin instead of a samach,
yeah.
something like that.
So that's an easy mistake. You know, this is the origin of Helm jokes. You know, everyone the Jewish tradition makes jokes about the town of Helm. You know, like in America,
Yeah.
people, you know, they say there was the American and Englishman and the Polish guy, you know, right? So the Polish guy becomes the butt of all the jokes.
Right.
So in traditionally Jewish, it was always the Helm. What happened?
Right.
Helm was actually a city of had great yeshivas and the rabbi was a great Torah scholar always. It was actually a center of Jewish learning. So what happened was that in the main synagogue, they had an ancient scroll, ancient Torah that they only used on simplest Torah. And the first word of the Torah, Bereshis, which starts with a base, was missing the first letter.
Oh,
And for years and years and years, was missing the base from Bereshis. For years, and they read it. Why? Because everyone knows the word off by heart pretty much. So you take a glance at it because you're not meant to read off by heart. But you're not, unfortunately, the reader wasn't paying careful enough attention. And it was unnoticed for years and years and years. Maybe 100, 200, you know. And then one time a guest was called up. He was given the honor of being the Chosim Bereshis, of being the one who gets to call up to start the reading of the Torah. And he says, it's missing a base. And then they became the butt of all the jokes. What person doesn't know the letter the Torah starts with? You know, it was, and that's how they became the butt of all the jokes. So it happens. So they have every letter has a form, a very precise and exact form. And this is because the Hebrew letters represent the spiritual energies with which the world was created. So that's why in Hebrew, a name of an item is not just a name. In English, you have something called a table and something called a chair. It's not because it's intrinsically a table or a chair. They're just name tags that we gave them so people know what we're talking about. If we all decided as a group, from now on, we're going to call a chair a table, and we call a table a chair, then that becomes their names. But it's just name tags. It's just to identify them. It's a consensus. Hebrew is the language of creation. And each letter represents a creative energy that created the world. And therefore, when we say that a stone is called an Evan, it's not just a name tag. That represents its spiritual source. This is why your Hebrew name is so important. It's not just a name. It represents the essence of your soul.
That's why they say that only Adam could name all the animals.
Right. So that's right. I mean, well, other people might have been able to name the animals. You know, if you all the animals to me, I also name them. This one's called the Boogly Loo. This one's called the Unga Bunga. I can make up any name I like. What the big thing that Adam named the animals on the sixth day of creation was that he gave them the correct name. He was able to see their spiritual entity, their source, and he gave the name that is the the letters representing their spiritual energy that created them. And since these letters represent a certain flow of divine energy, in a Torah, they have to be written in the form that really represents that. And therefore, it's very exact. It's a very exact business of how to write that. Now, we do have different kesavim. I'm going to loosely call it different fonts. It's really not the right idea. Say, for example, you hear people that say, I want to buy mezuzah, and they say, well, what type of writing do you want in Beis Yosef or a Rizal or, Alter Rebbe? The differences are so minute. So minute. It's within a framework. I mean, every person's handwriting is going to be slightly different, but there are small differences, but they are only in certain letters, only a few small differences. The general writing is all the same. And so therefore, the form of the letters is part of what gives the Torah scroll or the tefillin or the mezuzah its holiness. And if there's a problem in one of those letters, well, it depends what the problem is, it can break. It no longer has a holiness. I mean, you might think one little letter, what difference does it make? But, you can just think of a complex machinery or computer. Imagine like one thing is not plugged in where it's meant to be, or one piece is not connected. The whole thing doesn't work, or it might work, but it's faulty. So it's the same, similar idea. Now, I guess we'll start the chapter next week, run out of time. Yeah, so
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
you're
you,
welcome.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Wish
Rabbi.
everyone a wonderful
Stay
week.
safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.